She was just a little girl trying to make her way through the busy city morning. But one moment changed everything. What happened next will leave you speechless. Watch till the end. You won't believe how it all turns out. If you enjoy stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. The morning was heavy with mist as the city of Chicago stirred awake. The streets buzzed with impatient car horns, hurried footsteps, and the occasional clink of coffee cups from sidewalk vendors. People moved quickly, clutching briefcases, checking phones, weaving through the labyrinth of crosswalks and intersections. Amidst this daily chaos, a small figure slowly made her way across a busy crosswalk. Ava Johnson, a 10-year-old black girl with warm brown eyes and tightly braided hair, balanced carefully on a pair of crutches. Her left leg was encased in a stiff white cast that stretched from her ankle to her knee. Each step was a deliberate effort, a quiet battle against her own pain and the overwhelming current of the rushing crowd. She bit her lower lip, concentrating hard as she shifted her weight onto her good leg, lifted one crutch forward, and swung the casted leg with a small hop. Her backpack, a worn purple thing with a broken zipper, thudded lightly against her back. She didn't look around for help. She didn't expect it. Living in the city had taught Ava that people were too busy, too wrapped up in their own lives to notice a struggling child. Her mother had always told her, "Baby, you have to be your own hero." So Ava moved, step by determined step, across the wet pavement. Traffic lights blinked red, green, yellow, cars rumbled impatiently, and a chilly wind tugged at her light jacket. It was one of those mornings that made the city feel even bigger, colder, less forgiving. Pedestrians brushed past Ava, barely noticing the little girl in the cast struggling among them. She caught a glimpse of her reflection in a glass storefront as she moved, a small, solitary figure in a sea of motion. As Ava neared the curb, she took a deep breath, mentally counting the remaining steps. Her arms ached from the effort, and her armpits were sore from the pressure of the crutches. Still, she pressed on, her jaw set, her eyes fixed ahead. The hospital checkup was only a few blocks away, and she had promised her mother she'd go on her own this time. She wanted to prove she could be strong, independent. Just as she was about to reach the other side of the crosswalk, her crutches clicking rhythmically on the asphalt, a tall man in an expensive gray coat emerged from the crowd. Brian Miller was his name, although Ava, of course, didn't know that yet. He had a Bluetooth earpiece jammed into one ear and a scowl deepening the lines on his face. His briefcase swung by his side, and his polished shoes struck the pavement with sharp, impatient taps. His mind was far from the street. He was lost in a heated business call, arguing over sales numbers, feeling the pressure of an impending deadline gnawing at his nerves. Brian didn't even register Ava in his path until they were nearly upon each other, and even then, his only reaction was one of irritation, as though her presence, her struggle, was a personal affront to his schedule. Without slowing his stride, without even breaking his conversation, he jutted out his leg and kicked at one of Ava's crutches with a swift, sharp movement. The crutch clattered to the ground with a hollow, metallic sound, skittering several feet away. Ava froze, wobbling precariously on her one good leg and the remaining crutch. A sharp gasp escaped her lips, but she didn't cry out. She squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, willing herself not to fall, not to show weakness. Around her, the city continued its indifferent rush. No one stopped, no one stared. It was just another scene swallowed by the morning. When she opened her eyes, she spotted the fallen crutch lying on the cold, dirty pavement, far beyond her easy reach. Her heart sank. Biting her lip harder, she carefully shifted her weight and began the painstaking process of lowering herself to the ground. Each movement was slow, agonizing. Her cast bumped against the concrete. Her hands scraped the rough surface. She grimaced but said nothing. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away fiercely. Brian, meanwhile, had already continued on his way, his expression a mask of contempt. He barely glanced back at Ava, merely snorted under his breath and marched forward, his voice rising again in his Bluetooth headset as if nothing had happened at all. To him, she was less than an obstacle, less than a moment's inconvenience. Ava finally managed to retrieve her crutch, pulling it towards her with trembling fingers. She sat for a moment on the sidewalk, breathing heavily, before pushing herself upright again with sheer, stubborn strength. Her palms were scraped and dirty now, but she didn't even bother brushing them off. She simply adjusted the straps on her backpack, gripped both crutches tightly, and resumed her slow, painful journey across the pavement. Above her, the sky hung low and gray, the clouds threatening rain. The city moved relentlessly around her, as if daring her to keep going. And she did. Because that's what Ava Johnson had always done. She kept going. Brian Miller moved through the crowded sidewalk without a second thought about what had just happened. His phone conversation resumed its dominant place in his mind, filling his ears with complaints about quarterly reports and client expectations. His polished shoes clicked authoritatively against the pavement as he disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind the small wounded figure he had knocked off balance. The city swallowed him up, just another hurried figure in a mass of rushing humanity. Ava Johnson stood still for a few seconds longer, steadying herself, crutches firmly planted once more. Her scraped hands stung from the rough contact with the sidewalk, but she refused to rub them or cry. She inhaled deeply, trying to summon courage from somewhere deep inside her. She was used to being invisible, but this blatant act of cruelty burned in a way that indifference never had. She gritted her teeth and turned her face forward, refusing to give Brian even a backward glance. He didn't deserve her attention. He didn't deserve anything from her. The crossing light shifted from green to yellow. Ava pushed forward, her movements slightly shakier now, but no less determined. She reached the other side of the street just as the cars began to crawl forward again. The pressure of the city seemed to grow heavier, more suffocating, but she did not slow her pace. Meanwhile, Brian approached the entrance to a sleek glass office tower, pausing only to glance briefly at his reflection. He straightened his tie, brushed an invisible speck of lint from his coat, and exhaled sharply. The irritation from the call was still fresh, and his mind raced ahead to the difficult meeting he was about to face. As for the little girl he had kicked aside, he had already forgotten her. Not far from where the incident occurred, outside a cozy corner cafe called Mornin' Roast, Chris Walker adjusted the focus on his handheld camera. Chris, a 24-year-old black blogger with a knack for catching the small, often overlooked dramas of urban life, had been filming street scenes for a new segment he planned to post online. His concept was simple: capture the raw, unfiltered reality of the city. He had spent the morning recording everything from arguing couples to friendly strangers sharing umbrellas. When Chris noticed the man in the gray coat striding purposefully down the sidewalk, something about his body language caught his attention. He instinctively pointed his camera toward the approaching scene, just as Brian collided with Ava. Through the lens, Chris saw the cruel kick, the crutch flying, the little girl struggling not to fall. He filmed the entire incident. Ava's stoic struggle, her slow, painful descent to the ground, her fierce determination to lift herself back up. Chris lowered the camera slowly after the scene unfolded, his mouth slightly open in shock. He had seen plenty of rudeness while filming, but there was something particularly cold and heartless about what he had just witnessed. He replayed the footage on his small screen, watching the moment again with growing anger. His fingers hovered over the upload button, hesitation knotting in his stomach. Was it right to post this? Would it make any real difference? The city was full of tragedies that people ignored every day. But then Chris looked up and saw Ava, her head bowed slightly, continuing on her path with exhausted determination. No help, no acknowledgement. Just a little girl bearing more than she ever should have been forced to. His jaw tightened. Yes, it needed to be posted. People needed to see it. He found a quiet corner inside the cafe connected to the free Wi-Fi and uploaded the video to his YouTube channel, titling it simply, "When Kindness Dies, a City's Indifference." He added a short caption describing the location and what had happened, but left out any opinions, letting the video speak for itself. Before leaving the cafe, Chris checked his phone. The video already had a few hundred views. A few minutes later, it crossed 1,000. Comments started to pour in. Angry, heartbroken, outraged. Chris felt a mixture of satisfaction and unease. He hadn't meant to become part of a bigger story, but he had a feeling this video was going to spread further than anything he had ever posted before. Outside, the city continued its relentless pulse. Ava, unaware that her ordeal had been captured, limped onward toward her doctor's appointment, carrying her pain and her strength with quiet dignity. And far above her, in one of the Gleeman office towers, Brian Miller entered an elevator, oblivious to the gathering storm that would soon descend upon him. Chris Walker sat at a small table in the cafe, watching in amazement as the number of views on his video climbed rapidly. He refreshed the page and saw that in less than an hour, the video had already amassed over 10,000 views. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of realizing he had stumbled onto something much bigger than he anticipated. The comments section exploded with anger and heartbreak. People were furious at the man in the gray coat, furious at the city's coldness, furious that a little girl could be treated with such cruelty in broad daylight without anyone stepping in. Some commenters immediately demanded to know the man's identity. Others began sharing the video across social media platforms, tagging news outlets, city officials, and even celebrities. It didn't take long for the internet to work its relentless magic. Within a couple of hours, someone recognized the man in the video. A coworker, perhaps, or someone who had seen him in passing. The information leaked like a burst dam. Brian Miller's name, his position at a prestigious marketing firm downtown, even a photo of him from a company event surfaced online. Chris watched it unfold with a strange detachment. He hadn't planned for this. He had just wanted to show a moment of cruelty, to spark a little conversation. Instead, he had triggered a full-scale manhunt, a digital firestorm that was only growing larger by the minute. Hashtags began trending. #Justice, for Ava, #No Excuses, #City of Shame. Memes were created, photoshopping Brian's face onto images of villains from popular movies. People shared stories of their own experiences with urban cruelty and indifference, weaving Ava's story into a larger narrative of societal failure. At the same time, the video began to reach news editors. A few local journalists picked it up first, posting short articles with headlines like "Child Knocked Down by Businessman, No One Helps" and "Caught on Camera, City's Cold Heart Exposed." By mid-afternoon, National news outlets were beginning to take notice. A local news van even pulled up outside the cafe where Chris had filmed, reporters scrambling to find witnesses to capture reactions from passers-by. Chris sat silently, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he had unleashed. He thought about Ava, about the quiet strength she had shown, the way she hadn't cried or screamed or begged for help. She had simply picked herself up and kept moving. He realized then that this wasn't just about exposing cruelty. It was about honoring her strength, her resilience. Meanwhile, Brian Miller remained blissfully unaware. He spent most of the afternoon locked in tense meetings, arguing over campaign strategies and marketing budgets. His phone buzzed a few times, notifications piling up, but he ignored them, assuming they were minor work emails or social media updates he could deal with later. He was too focused on impressing his boss, Mr. Anderson, on securing his next promotion. The thought that his entire world was about to implode didn't even cross his mind. As the city's skyline darkened with the approach of evening, the firestorm around the video grew fiercer. People began calling for Brian to be fired. They flooded his company's social media pages with demands for accountability. Activists organized a small protest outside his office building, holding up signs with Ava's name and image captured from the video. What had started as a simple street encounter had now become a symbol, a rallying cry against cruelty and indifference. Chris walked away from the cafe around sunset, his camera packed safely in his bag. He felt a gnawing uncertainty in his chest. He had set something massive into motion, but he didn't know how it would end. All he could hope for was that, somehow, Ava would be lifted up by the attention, not crushed by it. Downtown, inside the towering glass building where Brian worked, a meeting finally ended. As he stepped into his office, his assistant, a young woman named Jessica, approached him with wide, worried eyes. "Mr. Miller," she said in a low voice, "you might want to check your email. And maybe social media, too." Brian frowned, irritation prickling at the edges of his mind. He pulled out his phone, finally unlocking it. The screen filled with dozens of notifications, mentions, messages, news alerts. Confusion turned quickly to dread as he clicked on a link Jessica had nervously forwarded. The video began to play. He saw himself, in crystal-clear footage, kicking the crutch from a struggling little girl and walking away without a second glance. Brian's face drained of color. His hands trembled slightly. He looked up at Jessica, who was now backing away slowly, as if fearing contamination from standing too close to him. For the first time that day, Brian realized something was terribly, terribly wrong, and it was already too late to stop it. By the early evening, the video of Ava's encounter had reached every major social media platform. It wasn't just a clip anymore, it had become a movement. News outlets picked up the story with sensational headlines, broadcasting the footage repeatedly across television screens and mobile devices. Talk shows invited social commentators to discuss what the incident revealed about modern society. Viral threads dissected every moment of Brian's body language, every expression on his face as he kicked Ava's crutch and walked away without remorse. Online, people flooded the comments sections with calls for action. Influencers reposted the video, adding their own words of outrage and heartbreak. Community organizers planned rallies. Within a matter of hours, #Justice for Ava had been mentioned millions of times, crossing borders and appearing on international news feeds. Major corporations that had previously partnered with Brian's firm began to issue public statements distancing themselves from the controversy. The domino effect had started, and it showed no signs of stopping. people dug deeper into Brian's past. Internet sleuths found old insensitive tweets, minor complaints about customer service incidents, even photos that now, through the new lens of public anger, painted him as an entitled bully. Everything about him was scrutinized. Some defended him weakly, suggesting it was a mistake, that the city was harsh and people were stressed. But those voices were drowned out by the overwhelming tide of outrage demanding accountability. In the center of the storm stood Ava, unaware of the growing firestorm. After her doctor's appointment, she had gone home to the small apartment she shared with her mother in a quiet, worn-down neighborhood. Her mother, Tanya Johnson, noticed the scrapes on Ava's hands and the tear in her jacket but said nothing at first. She had learned over the years to give her daughter space to share in her own time. Ava finally told her what happened while they ate dinner, describing the man in the crutch without much emotion. Tanya's hands clenched around her fork, but she stayed calm, knowing her daughter needed strength, not fear. Meanwhile, at Brian's workplace, tensions were rising. His co-workers whispered behind closed doors. His email inbox overflowed with messages from HR, urgent meeting requests from executives, and personal notes from colleagues distancing themselves from him. His office phone rang constantly, but he ignored it. He sat behind his desk, staring blankly at the screen, replaying the video over and over, trying to find a way to explain it, to justify it, but there was none. The images were too clear, too damning. The management of the firm, feeling the immense pressure from clients and the public, convened an emergency meeting. Brian's future was being discussed without him even in the room. The CEO, Mr. Anderson, a man known for his ruthlessness in protecting the company's image, made it clear they could not afford to be associated with someone now seen as the embodiment of urban callousness. The brand's survival depended on swift and decisive action. That night, outside Brian's office building, a crowd gathered. Small at first, just a handful of people holding signs that read, "Kindness Matters," and "Stand with Ava." But as word spread, more joined. Students, parents with children, workers on their way home stopped and picked up placards that volunteers handed out. They chanted Ava's name, demanded justice, demanded decency. Police arrived, not to break up the peaceful protest, but to manage the swelling crowd. News vans lined the street. Reporters shoved microphones into faces, asking why they had come. Most answered simply, "Because it could have been my child," or "Because we have to stand up for each other." Ava's face, captured mid-struggle in the video, was printed on posters projected onto buildings. She had become a symbol without even realizing it. Inside his office, Brian pulled at his tie, feeling the noose tighten around his career. His phone buzzed again, and he finally answered a call from his lawyer, who advised him to lay low and avoid public statements. But it was clear there would be no easy escape. His reputation was beyond repair. Chris Walker watched the coverage from his small apartment, his heart pounding. He hadn't expected this kind of reaction, but seeing the way people had rallied behind Ava made him feel like maybe, just maybe, the city still had some heart left. He only hoped that Ava herself would not be overwhelmed by everything happening in her name. In the Johnson household, Tanya gently tucked Ava into bed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. She didn't tell her daughter about the protests, about the video going viral. She just whispered, "You're strong, baby. Don't you ever forget that," before turning off the light and sitting quietly by her bedside, standing watch over the little girl who, without even trying, had reminded an entire city of its humanity. The next morning dawned cold and overcast, a heavy stillness hanging over the city as if it too were holding its breath. Brian Miller barely slept the night before. He had sat in his expensive downtown apartment, staring at the news on TV, scrolling endlessly through the vicious storm of social media posts. His name was everywhere, attached not to success or influence but to shame and disgust. He could hardly believe how quickly everything had spiraled out of control. He arrived at his office building early, hoping to avoid attention, but already a few reporters were lingering outside, cameras at the ready. He kept his head down and pushed through the revolving doors without answering their shouted questions. The security guard at the front desk gave him a look of thinly veiled contempt before reluctantly allowing him through. Brian's elevator ride to the top floor was painfully slow. Every second felt stretched, every metallic groan of the elevator echoing loudly in his mind. When the doors finally opened, his heart sank. Waiting for him at the end of the hallway was Mr. Anderson, the CEO of the firm, a tall, stoic man with a reputation for decisive, merciless leadership. Brian tried to put on his usual confident mask as he approached, but Anderson's expression was unreadable. Without a word, Anderson turned and walked into his office, motioning for Brian to follow. The door closed behind them with a soft but final click. On Anderson's massive oak desk sat a tablet, its screen facing Brian. With slow, deliberate movements, Anderson tapped the screen, starting the video. Brian watched himself again, watched the kick, the crutch flying, the little girl's silent, painful struggle to pick herself up. In the heavy silence of the office, the sounds of the city captured in the video seemed deafening. When the clip ended, Anderson leaned back in his chair and studied Brian with a cold, analytical gaze. Brian opened his mouth to speak, to explain, to apologize, but Anderson cut him off with a single raised hand. "We don't need people like you representing us," Anderson said, his voice low but firm. "Effective immediately. You are terminated." The words hit Brian like a slap. He staggered slightly where he stood, unable to find footing in the sudden collapse of his world. He tried to argue, to plead, but the CEO's face was made of stone. There was no negotiation here, no second chances. The decision had already been made. "You will be escorted out by security," Anderson added, pressing a button on his desk. Almost instantly, 2 security guards appeared at the door. They weren't rough, but their message was clear. Brian was no longer welcome. Stripped of his badge and personal belongings, he was walked out of the office he had once thought he owned, past co-workers who pretended to be busy, avoiding his eyes. The humiliation was total. Outside, the crowd had grown larger. Protesters cheered when they saw him being led out. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions, none of which Brian could bear to answer. His face burned with shame as he pushed through the mob, desperate to get away. He stumbled into a cab and barked out his home address, slumping into the seat as if all the strength had been drained from his body. The driver gave him a sideways glance, clearly recognizing him from the news, but said nothing. As the cab pulled away, Brian stared out the window at the city he had once moved through with such careless authority. Now it felt alien, hostile, full of judgment. His career was over. His reputation was ruined. He would be lucky if he ever found another job that didn't involve mopping floors. Meanwhile, in a different part of the city, Chris Walker checked his notifications and saw the news break. Brian Miller fired. He felt a grim satisfaction, but also a deep sense of responsibility. He had shown the truth. The world had reacted. Change, however small, had happened. And in her small bedroom, Ava Johnson sat at her desk, working on her homework with her tongue sticking out in concentration. She still didn't know the full extent of what her quiet strength had set into motion. All she knew was that tomorrow she would put on her backpack, grab her crutches, and keep moving forward, just like always. The news of Brian Miller's firing spread almost as quickly as the original video had. Headlines blared across television screens and news sites. Businessman fired after viral video incident. City unites behind injured girl. Public reaction was swift and overwhelmingly supportive of the decision. Commentators praised the company's zero-tolerance stance, while others reflected on how a small act of cruelty had led to such a massive downfall. The city, for once, seemed united in its sense of outrage and its need to right a wrong. Meanwhile, journalists worked tirelessly to find Ava Johnson. It didn't take long. One reporter, after some discreet conversations around the neighborhood, discovered the small apartment where Ava lived with her mother, Tanya. They approached carefully, understanding the sensitivity of the situation. Tanya, initially wary, agreed to a brief interview under the condition that Ava's privacy would be respected as much as possible. When Ava saw the reporters and cameras, she was shy but composed. They asked her about what had happened, and Ava, in her quiet way, told the truth without embellishment or self-pity. She didn't talk about feeling victimized or demand attention. She simply described how she had focused on staying on her feet, on picking herself up, and continuing her way to the doctor. Her strength and resilience touched everyone who watched. The interviews aired that evening, and the response was immediate. Viewers from across the country sent messages of support. Donations poured in. Some people sent new crutches, lightweight, custom-fitted ones designed for better comfort. Others sent toys, books, art supplies. Local businesses offered free services to Ava and her mother. A toy store owner delivered a large stuffed lion, explaining that he had seen Ava's determination and wanted her to have something that symbolized her courage. But it wasn't the gifts that meant the most. It was the visits, the small personal gestures. Neighbors who had never spoken to the Johnsons before came by to offer words of encouragement. A firefighter who had seen the story on the news dropped off a note that simply said, "You are stronger than you know." A group of school children made a card covered in colorful handprints with the words, "We believe in you, Ava," scrawled across the top. Ava accepted everything with a grace beyond her years. She smiled shyly at the cameras when necessary, but seemed far more focused on her homework, her physical therapy sessions, and practicing walking more confidently on her crutches. Her mother, watching her daughter's calm persistence, felt a swell of pride that no words could contain. Chris Walker also paid a visit, standing awkwardly at the door with his camera slung over his shoulder. He didn't come to film. He came to apologize if the sudden fame had caused any discomfort. But Tanya shook his hand warmly and thanked him. Without his footage, without his willingness to expose the truth, none of the support Ava received would have been possible. The city moved forward, a little more aware, a little more attentive. In the weeks that followed, there were small but noticeable changes. People seemed to slow down more often to help someone struggling with a heavy load or hold a door open a little longer. Conversations about kindness, community, and decency became more common in classrooms, offices, and even casual conversations. And Ava, she healed. Her leg grew stronger. She practiced walking without crutches with the same determination she had shown crossing that busy street. She went back to school, where her classmates treated her with newfound respect. Teachers spoke to her as someone who had shown real courage, not as someone to pity. One afternoon, while walking home from school, Ava paused at the very same intersection where everything had happened. She stood there for a moment, looking out at the rushing crowd. Cars still honked, people still hurried, but Ava felt different. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just a struggling little girl lost in the chaos. She was Ava Johnson, the girl who had reminded a city what it meant to care. Smiling to herself, Ava adjusted her backpack, gripped her new crutches, and stepped forward into the crowd, moving steadily, confidently, knowing that whatever the world threw at her next, she had the strength to face it. Thank you for watching this powerful story to the end. Remember, even the smallest actions can change lives. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories.